The courtroom was buzzing with anticipation as the judge walked in. The walls, which had seen countless cases come and go, now seemed to hum with an air of expectation. The judge, an experienced man with a stern reputation, took his seat at the bench. He adjusted his glasses, looked around, and nodded at the defense and prosecution teams. But all eyes in the room soon fell on one individual, an unassuming teenager, no older than 17, seated at the defendant's table. She wore a simple outfit, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she seemed almost out of place in the imposing, adult world of legal proceedings. At first glance, she appeared to be just another teenager caught up in a case beyond her control. She was nervous, fidgeting with her hands, and avoided making eye contact with anyone in the courtroom. There was nothing about her that would hint at what was to come. But as the proceedings began, the judge, who had seen it all, took one look at her and let out a quiet chuckle. He smirked and, in his usual sarcastic tone, remarked, "Are you sure you're ready for this? This isn't a game. Maybe you should go back to high school." The courtroom fell into an awkward silence. The judge's words were dripping with disdain, almost mocking the young girl. Her face flushed slightly, but she didn't back down. Instead, she just gave a small, almost imperceptible. Then she did something no one expected. She turned to the judge and said, "I suggest you reconsider your initial assessment of me. You're about to see why." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The courtroom was on edge. What did she mean by that? What was she about to reveal? Everyone knew something was unfolding, but no one was quite sure what it was. The judge's face tightened. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but before he could say anything, the teenager continued, "I'm not just here to defend a case. I'm here to expose a truth you're not ready to face." At this point, the room had completely shifted. The prosecutor, who had been so confident earlier, now looked uncertain. The defense team, unsure of where this was going, exchanged worried glances. Even the judge was visibly ruffled, his usual composure slipping as the teenager's words began to sink in. What was she talking about? What truth was she about to reveal? The entire room leaned forward, captivated by the mystery that was unfolding. Every person in that courtroom, from the judge to the jury to the spectators in the gallery, had to wonder, who was this teenager really? And what was the real story behind her incredible talent and unshakable confidence? But just as the tension reached its peak, the teenager fell silent. She sat back down, her face calm, almost as if she had said everything she needed to say. The courtroom was frozen. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if time itself had stopped. And with that, the judge called for a recess, his voice heavy with uncertainty. The audience filed out of the courtroom, whispering amongst themselves, eager for answers. But for now, the mystery remained unsolved. What would happen next? Would the teenager's revelations turn the case on its head? And most importantly, what was she hiding? The truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. The recess felt like an eternity. Outside the courtroom, the buzz of the crowd mixed with the muffled sounds of conversations. But inside, all was quiet. The judge remained in his chambers, his mind racing. He had thought he had seen everything in his long career, but this was something different. A teenager, barely more than a child in his eyes, had just turned the tables in front of him, exposing weaknesses in the prosecution's case, and leaving him wondering if he had underestimated her in ways he couldn't even comprehend. The teenager, seated now in the defendant's chair, hadn't moved an inch. Her calm demeanor made her seem almost detached from the chaos unfolding around her. Her name was Lily Carter, but at this moment, she was more than just a name to anyone in the courtroom. The whispers had begun. How could someone so young, so seemingly out of place, have such an intricate understanding of the law? And why, in the world of legal professionals, had she chosen to remain in the shadows until now? Lily wasn't just some prodigy who had stumbled upon a law book one day and decided to play at being a lawyer. Her story went much deeper than that, and the secrets she carried with her were not the kind she could simply reveal in a courtroom. There was something bigger at play, something that tied her to this case in ways no one could have predicted. She had always been different. As a child, she had been fascinated by the legal system, the intricacies of the law, the way words could be used to build or destroy. While other kids played sports or watched cartoons, Lily spent hours reading court transcripts, studying the ways lawyers argued and how cases were built. But what the world didn't know was that she wasn't just a curious teenager. She had been raised around law. Her mother, a once promising defense attorney, had mysteriously disappeared a few years ago, leaving Lily with only fragments of memories and a burning desire to uncover the truth behind her disappearance. When Lily was just 14, her mother had been involved in a controversial case, one that had gained national attention. It was a case that challenged the very fabric of the legal system, with accusations of corruption running deep. Her mother had been on the verge of uncovering something enormous when she vanished without a trace. Some believed she had fled to protect herself from powerful forces. Others thought she had been silenced. But for Lily, the disappearance of her mother was more than a tragedy. It was a puzzle she was determined to solve. And the case that was now unfolding in court was a thread she knew might lead her right to the answers she had been searching for. The case was about corruption at the highest levels, corruption that ran through the local law enforcement and the city's political elites. Lily had only recently learned that the defendant in the current case, a man named Frank Donovan, was involved in that very network. He wasn't just any criminal. He was a key player in the web that had ensnared her mother. Donovan had been one of the last people to see her before she disappeared, and Lily had no doubt that he held answers that could change everything for her. But the path was dangerous. Donovan wasn't just some street-level thug. He was smart, powerful, and connected. And Lily knew that if she exposed him, there would be consequences. That's why she had taken the extreme step of disguising herself as a teenager with no legal background. By hiding her true abilities, she could get close to him without arousing suspicion. No one would suspect that a quiet, nervous teenager could pose a threat. Yet, as the trial progressed, Lily couldn't ignore the feelings of doubt that gnawed at her. The deeper she got into the case, the more she realized that the stakes were far higher than she had anticipated. She wasn't just fighting for her own mother's disappearance anymore. She was fighting for justice, for the lives of others who had been crushed under the weight of a corrupt system. The courtroom buzzed back to life as the recess ended, and Lily stood once again, walking toward the front of the room with a calmness that defied her age. The judge returned to his seat, and the spectators took their seats as well, each person eager to see how this strange, twisted story would unfold. The prosecutor, though still flustered from earlier, had regained his composure, and it seemed like he was preparing for a counterattack. But what no one could see, the judge, the prosecutor, the jury, was that Lily had already anticipated every move. She had spent hours reviewing every detail of the case, memorizing every document, every testimony. But the most important thing she had learned was that Donovan wasn't just guilty of the charges against him. He was the key to unraveling a much larger conspiracy that reached into the heart of the city's power structure. The prosecutor began presenting his case, his voice steady but lacking the confidence it once had. He tried to pick apart the points Lily had made earlier, but each time he did, she was one step ahead. She countered his arguments with precision, revealing contradictions in the evidence and pointing out holes in the prosecution's narrative. It wasn't just the law that she was using to her advantage. Lily had spent years cultivating an understanding of human behavior. She knew how to read people, how to exploit their weaknesses without them even realizing it. When she turned her gaze to Donovan, sitting calmly at the defendant's table, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. He was watching her, studying her every move. Donovan wasn't rattled like the others. In fact, he seemed strangely composed. But Lily could feel the subtle shift in the air. He knew exactly what she was doing, And in that moment, she realized that the game had changed. He wasn't just a pawn in her quest for justice. He was a player too. And this case was as much about power and survival as it was about right and wrong. The tension in the room thickened as the prosecution made its final arguments. The judge, who had once mocked Lily for her youth, now looked at her with a weary respect. He was no longer sure who held the upper hand in this courtroom, and it was clear that whatever decision he made, it would not be without consequences. But just as the judge prepared to call for the final statement, Lily stood once again. She looked around the courtroom, her eyes locking with the judge's, and in that moment, everyone knew that this wasn't just a case about corruption. It was about something far deeper, something that, if revealed, could shake the foundations of the entire legal system. "I have one more thing to present," she said, her voice calm but resolute. The room fell silent. The prosecutor's face paled, and Donovan's smirk faded. The judge's eyes narrowed. What Lily had prepared to reveal in that final moment, what she had been building toward for weeks, was about to come to light. But was she ready for what would happen once the truth was finally exposed? The room held its breath, and so did Lily. The final piece was about to fall into place, but no one knew whether it would break the case wide open or destroy everything she had worked for. Lily took a deep breath, her eyes steady as she turned to face the judge. The weight of what she was about to do pressed down on her like 1,000 pounds, but she knew she had no choice. She had already come too far, and this was the moment that would either make or break everything. The tension in the courtroom was so thick it was almost suffocating, as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for the final revelation. "I'm not just here to defend a case," Lily said, her voice carrying through the silence. "I'm here to reveal the truth about this entire legal system. This case, this trial, it's all connected to something much bigger. Something none of you can ignore." The judge's brow furrowed. The prosecutor looked stunned, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. Donovan, seated at the defendant's table, hadn't moved a muscle, but there was a flicker in his eyes. A flicker of realization that made Lily's heart race. He knew. He knew exactly what she was about to say. Lily pulled a stack of documents from her briefcase and placed them on the table with a deliberate motion. She flipped open the top file, revealing a series of confidential emails and records. "These are emails from your office, Judge Stevens," she said, her voice unwavering. "Emails that implicate you directly in the corruption network I'd be investigating. And it doesn't end there. They also tie Frank Donovan to a series of high-profile political deals that go back over a decade." The courtroom gasped. The judge's face went pale, and for the first time, his confident demeanor cracked. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Donovan, too, looked stunned, his usual smug expression replaced with a look of pure tension. Lily continued, her words slicing through the tension. "These records show how you've been covering up crimes for Donovan and his associates. Deals that led to my mother's disappearance. She was close to exposing all of this before she vanished. And I spent years finding the pieces, tracking every clue, every lead, until I could finally bring them all together. This case was never just about Frank Donovan. It's about the system that allows men like him to operate with impunity." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. The courtroom was silent. The weight of what she had just exposed felt like an earthquake, rattling everything it touched. For a moment, no one moved. No one dared to speak. It was as if the world had stopped turning, waiting for the next move. The judge's hands trembled slightly as he looked at the documents in front of him. He knew this wasn't just a bluff. The evidence was irrefutable, and the room was fully aware of the consequences if this truth went public. The corruption she had just unveiled wasn't just limited to a few individuals. It was a systemic problem that reached far beyond the walls of the courtroom. It would shatter lives. It would shake the very foundation of the city's legal and political system. Lily didn't look away. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had fought for this moment, and now the world was finally going to see the truth. You can't hide behind your badge anymore, Judge Stevens, she said coldly. And neither can you, Donovan. The people you've manipulated, the lives you've destroyed, they deserve justice. And I won't stop until they get it. There was a long pause, and then finally, the judge stood, his face drained of color. He didn't say a word, but the message was clear. He couldn't keep up the facade. The truth was out, and then there was Frank Donovan. The once imposing figure now seemed smaller, less confident. His connections, his money, his power, they didn't seem so impenetrable anymore. For the first time in years, he was truly afraid. He had thought that no one could touch him. But Lily, the teenager he had so easily dismissed, had just undone everything he had worked to protect. In the end, the judge called for an immediate recess. The courtroom erupted in chaos as news of the corruption spread like wildfire. Donovan was taken into custody, the charges against him now more serious than anyone could have imagined. The evidence Lily had provided was enough to secure his conviction, and the unraveling of the entire network he had been a part of. Judge Stevens was placed under investigation, and his connections were exposed for the world to see. The political scandal that followed made headlines across the country, as the truth about the city's corruption was laid bare. But even with the victory, Lily knew the fight wasn't over. The justice system wasn't perfect, and the people who had been complicit in this network wouldn't go down without a fight. There were still many untold stories, many unanswered questions. But for the first time in years, Lily felt a sense of peace. She had uncovered the truth, and she had given her mother's disappearance the voice it needed. As the final gavel came down, signaling the end of the trial, Lily couldn't help but think back to everything that had led her here. The years of searching, the hours spent studying law, the quiet moments alone with her thoughts, and the sacrifice it had taken to get this far. She had become more than just a teenager in disguise. She had become the catalyst for change. The courtroom began to empty, the spectators filing out in stunned silence. But Lily stayed behind for a moment longer. She looked at the papers on the table, the evidence that had changed everything, and for the first time, she felt like she had truly made a difference. The fight was far from over, but she had taken the first step toward justice, and that was something no one could ever take away from her. As she walked out of the courtroom, a reporter caught her eye. "Lily," he said, holding up a microphone, "what's next for you?" Lily smiled, a quiet determination in her eyes. "Next, we make sure this never happens again." And with that, she walked away, knowing that the truth would always find a way to rise to the surface.